As I was watching the BYU basketball team put the finishing touches on their win over West Virginia Saturday night, I had a bit of a deja vu moment thinking back to 5 years ago this time and the unfulfilled legacy of the 2020 BYU basketball team. Could this year's team live that dream?
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And as always, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. Go to FanDuel.com to get started today. Coming up on today's show, we're going to talk a little bit about the legacy of this year's BYU basketball team and the things they could do as compared to what 2020 held for the BYU Cougars. We'll also look at BYU football and why I think they maybe get a little bit of a raw deal when it comes to projections for this upcoming football season. And we'll finish back on the basketball front. Interesting comment from one of BYU's veterans about a fellow vet that I think is absolutely valid. So without further ado, let's delve right in. And BYU got a really, really nice win on Saturday night, beating West Virginia. Really interesting tale of two halves. BYU got really down in the mud, as it were, with West Virginia in the first half, had a 25-19 lead at halftime, and then erupted for 52 second half points and ran away from West Virginia for their sixth straight victory. Funny enough, their six-game win streak started in Morgantown, and the latest win came in Provo, both against the West Virginia Mountaineers. But the bigger point I have to make on today's show was that this BYU team, it's getting some really eerily similar vibes to that 2019-2020 team that had their season canceled due to the global pandemic due to COVID-19. All of you will recall what happened 5 years ago and how it seemingly shut down the sports world, if not the greater just world at large. But I can tell you, watching this team and the commentary about this year's BYU basketball squad, I'm telling you, there's some very interesting, circumstances, some very interesting just matching up, it feels like, with how these two teams are trending up at the right time. Think back to that 2019-2020 team. They were at the peak of their powers. They had an elite post presence in Yoli Childs. They were shooting threes with reckless abandon, but hitting them at an extremely high clip. It was absolutely awesome to watch TJ Haws, just that entire crew go out and do their thing. And it felt like they had come into their own in the final few weeks of the season. They had massive win after massive win. Who can ever forget that win they had over Gonzaga on their home court there in Provo? And then the world gets shut down and they never get to live the dream that many of us hope they might be able to live by making a run in the NCAA tournament. This year's team, early struggles, really kind of took some time to gel, had to get everything worked out. But they are peaking right about the same timeline of this 2020 squad going into a conference tournament. And barring something completely unforeseen out there in the world, it appears that this BYU basketball team will be able to live out their dream of playing in the NCAA tournament and to fulfill essentially the dream that 2019-2020 squad had of making a deep run in the NCAA tournament. Now, this may be way too early for me to be talking about this, but that was really the only thought I had as I watched that game against West Virginia play out. I had a conversation with somebody involved at BYU after that game. I'm not going to name them because it wasn't on the record, but we were talking after the game. It was a very brief conversation, but it centered on the fact that that game against West Virginia was unlike essentially any other win BYU's had most of the season. Think about it. The last two games before that, BYU was hitting three after three after three. They had 17 made three-pointers in the game against Arizona State alone, absolutely just bombing away. West Virginia came in with a very straightforward game plan. We are not allowing BYU to beat us from the three-point line. BYU didn't make a three in the first half of that contest. It was the first time all season long they had not had a made three-pointer in the first half of a game. In the second half, they made just 5, but they still ran away and absolutely boat raced a pretty darn good team. Speaking of the West Virginia Mountaineers, and the conversation I had was that this is a BYU team that learned it can win in a gritty, hard-nosed defensive fashion that will serve them well. come the Big 12 tournament and, more importantly, the NCAA tournament. There has been a bit of a book on this BYU basketball team. If you get ultra physical with them and you essentially force the referees to back off because they're not going to call every single foul out there, that BYU has struggled to be able to play through that. I think this game against West Virginia showed that BYU grew up a little bit in that moment and showed, yeah, we can win in this fashion. We can win in that fashion. We can win in any fashion. And that's much like that 2019-2020 team. I will always remember that team for being so good from the three-point line, but I forget, I think, if I were to go back and look at it, they were deadly at the rim. Guys like Yoli Childs, they don't grow on trees out there. And BYU is lucky to have him in the program at the time that they did. And they won games in different fashions that season as well, coming out of the West Coast Conference. Obviously, the talent level, the overall strength of the conference is much higher now that BYU's in the Big 12 Conference. But I absolutely think that this BYU squad, they are trending right along those same lines of that 2019-2020 team. But this time, let's hope they can go out and do some damage and essentially fulfill the legacy that that 2020 team had in it, it felt like. Because I did that podcast. So those of you watching this on YouTube, you know, I do this in a closet in my basement, and I'm unashamed of where I do it. I've created a nice little space for myself to do this podcast. But I can tell you, when the world essentially got shut down, we found out that BYU was not going to play in the NCAA tournament. I'm pointing here, right outside this door over here in my closet, about 5 feet away is where I recorded that very podcast, reacting in the moment to BYU and the rest of the NCAA tournament essentially being shut down. It was just a crazy thing to consider. The West Coast Conference tournament, Mountain West tournament, was the Pac-12 tournament, all that stuff in Vegas that was going on, all shut down. And then the NCAA tournament summarily was canceled as well. And it ended what was a very promising BYU basketball season. This year, no such luck. It should go on as anticipated. And I think this BYU team, if they continue on the track they're going on, and they have a huge game tomorrow night against Iowa State, because you don't get much better, or much bigger or better than going to Ames, Iowa, a place that BYU last year, they gave Iowa State everything they can handle out there in Ames, and ultimately came up a little bit short down the stretch in that contest. If they can go out and beat that Iowa State squad in Ames, I think that would be kind of the stamp on this team of saying, yeah, this team, they got everything it needs. Because if you can win on the road in that environment, following up 2 other big wins in recent weeks over the likes of Arizona and Kansas, yeah, that BYU team, much like the 2019-2020 version, might have really, really a deep run potential in them. And I'm telling you, the hype train, much like it was in 2020, only gets crazier from here if they can pull off that win in Iowa. Even if they don't, I'm telling you, it feels eerily similar. The vibes I'm getting from this year's team, what I remember about the 2019-2020 season, they are feeling so like just in lockstep with one another. We'll see if this year's team can ultimately live that dream and fulfill the destiny of maybe 2 teams in the process. All right, coming up here in just a minute, we're going to talk a little BYU football. I'm looking at over-under win totals, and I just don't get it. The Big 12 as a whole, getting a little bit overlooked. They think this conference is going to be that conference that just eats its own. But could BYU rise above the fray and surprise people yet again in 2025? Let's delve into it coming up next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Roy. Of course, my Cougar fans, if you ever wish you could directly support your favorite BYU athletes and be a part of their journey, I think all of us have dreamed about that. Now you can. You can do it with Roy, the NIL app that puts fans in control. Before Roy, NIL deals were often handled behind closed doors, and fans like you didn't have a clear way to directly benefit and support the athletes that you love. Now with Roy, you can make a real impact and feel closer to the athletes representing BYU. With Roy, you essentially get to do this. You choose the player you want to support, decide how much you want to support that athlete for money-wise, and get exclusive content straight from the athletes you back as the return on your investment in them. The best part, if your player transfers, you get your money back, and so it's a risk-free way to show your support and make your voice heard for your favorite BYU athletes today. Support your favorite players directly and help shape the future of BYU sports, and download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing BYU athletes the way they deserve, with transparency, trust, and real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now, by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite players today. Once again, with the Roy app, wherever you get your apps. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope y'all are doing well on this Monday. Had a fantastic weekend. I hope all y'all did the same. Now, BYU football is looking forward to, I think, a really, really potential field 2025 season. Remember, coming off a really monumental 11-2 campaign a year ago, really showed what they're capable of as a football program. And the national media, the sports books out there, our friends at FanDuel, for whatever reason, they apparently don't believe in BYU in 2025. Let me show you an example of that. So our friends over at FanDuel, obviously they're a proud sponsor here on the podcast. They have BYU's over-under win totals for 2025 set at 7.5 wins. Yes, 8-4 is what would cover if you took the over in that circumstance. The highest win total in the conference across the board from FanDuel is 8.5 wins. That is shared by Kansas State, Arizona State, and then also Texas Tech, I think, has 8.5 wins as their over-under win total. So they believe that the best team or teams in the Big 12 Conference at this outset are going to go 9-3 if they're going to go over on that bet. Now, let's also acknowledge the fact that betting lines are set just to do that, to get people to entice them to bet. I'm sure some of you out there, and if you want to cash on that $150, you can go right now to FanDuel.com and place a $5 bet on BYU over under 7.5 wins and take that money right now. You can get in on that. Obviously, you have to play out the entire season to see how it all goes. But it is my initial reaction that 7.5 wins, that's low. Because here's the deal. BYU's vaunted rival, the team that's, for whatever reason, that people still believe is going to have a bounce back year, the vaunted Utah Utes, their under win total from our friends at FanDuel, 7.5 wins. They believe that BYU and Utah are essentially on the same plane right now in the Big 12 Conference. The bigger point to be made is they think the Big 12 Conference, the best teams are not even going to get to double-digit wins without a bowl win. That is what we're looking at right now in the Big 12 Conference. I see it as a bit of a slap in the face of the entire Big 12 because, yet again, there's some exceptionalism going on with the SEC and the Big 10, even though the SEC, let's be honest, pretty bad across the board, it felt like last year as a conference. But the bigger point to be made here is, can a team like a BYU rise above the fray, obviously surpass a 7.5 total win total, and become that team that carries the banner for the Big 12 Conference? Well, let's also look at metrics as to why BYU might be sitting where they're sitting. And that goes to the SP Plus rankings from Bill Connolly at ESPN. Now, these are predictive analytics looking forward to the season ahead, but using past numbers to kind of project where teams are at. Well, the best team in the conference, according to Bill Connolly's numbers right now, are the Kansas State Wildcats. They're number 19 with a 13.7 SP Plus rating. From ESPN. So they are down the list. There's a lot of SEC teams, Big 10 teams that are in front of them. Notre Dame is up there on the list. I just look at this, and Miami's the only Clemson and Miami are the two highest ACC teams here at 11 and 14. But then you have Kansas State checking in at 19. Well, where's BYU, Jake? Well, they are the second highest. The third highest Big 12 team. TCU, who has an over-under win total of 6.5 wins, has a SP Plus number of 10.5. And then at number 27, there's BYU checking in with a 10.1 SP Plus number. Now, does that mean the BYU cannot make a run? No, that doesn't mean they can't make a run, but they are in very close territory with Iowa State and Arizona State placing 28th and 29th right behind them. So that's, I think, why maybe these sports books essentially are putting the Big 12's top tier, including BYU, ASU, Kansas State, Utah. In this case, TCU probably needs to be up a little bit higher. That's why I think they're putting them at that kind of 7.5, 8.5 win total, trying to entice bettors because they think they could be that proverbial crab in buckets where they're essentially dragging each other back down into the fray. That's the interesting part about this, is which team or teams can essentially establish themselves as the banner waivers for the Big 12. And could a Kansas State jump from 19 into the top 10? Could BYU go from that 27 spot and find themselves top tier? The way too early preseason polls are giving BYU a lot more love than the predictive analytics like SP Plus, because ESPN, where Bill Connolly has BYU 27th, Their way too early preseason poll they put out right after the national championship had the Cougars inside the top 10. So there's a bit of a dichotomy here of eyeballs versus numbers when it comes to the BYU football program. Many of you know that I use numbers. I don't necessarily say numbers are the end all be all, but they are a very useful thing to learn and obviously analyze how teams are coming along, where they may be going. But they also, there's just plain old dumb luck in football that cannot be quantified in my mind that you have to watch play out. This is a BYU team, speaking of the 2025 version, that they have got a lot of self-belief in that locker room. We'll be back out there at BYU football practice later this afternoon. It's a second opportunity for us as a media corps to watch about 20 minutes of practice. This will be their third practice of 15 practices in the spring period. But the thing is, this BYU team, the vibe I said last week at the end of the week, talking about the BYU football program was, this is a team, they know that they have got a ton of potential within them because they realized a lot of it a year ago, but they also understand that they had a razor thin margin that kept them from living their ultimate dreams of going to the Big 12 title game, of going to the college football playoff. And they're chomping at the bit to get a chance to run it back and get past that little, those, I don't call them speed bumps or whatever you want to call it, whatever those issues were that caused BYU, the plays, insert whatever adjective you want, that kept them from realizing their full potential a year ago. They're chasing that this year. And there's going to be a lot of pressure heaped upon them. There's a good reason why they're going to probably be at worst one of the top 4 teams in the preseason Big 12 poll, if not top 3, top 2, maybe the favorite. They should be there because really, they finished the season with an absolute flourish. That win over Colorado is going to stick in a lot of BYU fans and the national media's minds as to what BYU did to the Colorado Buffaloes and Coach Prime. I think this BYU team understands where they're at. They understand that, yes, they accomplished a lot a year ago. They're very proud of what they did in 2024, but they want to take it to the next level in 2025. They want to go to the Big 12 title game. They want to go and play in the college football playoff if they can make it there. They want to live those dreams that the 2024 team came oh so close to living. And what it's going to take is they're going to have to lock in and understand that you cannot for a second blink. You can't take a play off. You have to stay engaged the entire way through. This level of football, if you want to play championship level caliber football, you have to go out there and be locked in every single play. And human nature is to take plays off or to take moments off. You simply cannot do that. And the training BYU's gone through, what they're going through right now with the strength and conditioning staff, the practices they're running right now here in the spring, all of it is geared towards staying locked in, staying in the moment, and understanding that right now, the biggest thing is the biggest thing right in front of you. Don't look beyond that. Don't look beyond the mark. Go out there, handle your business, get the job done as best you can today, and then worry about tomorrow when it comes. And once again, I'm as human being. I'm as infallible a human as infallible. I know I'm as fallible. I'm not infallible. I am as fallible a human as there is out there. And I far too often look beyond the mark. That's what this BYU team, as it is human nature, has to fight against here as they look forward. I think they've got a really, really solid coaching staff led by Kalani Sitake that will absolutely do its best to keep the guys engaged and keep them focused on the here and now. But if they want to live this and surpass what FanDuel believes about them, what the SP Plus predictive analytics believe about them, they understand that they got really close a year ago. And now can you push through that and break through and live those dreams? It's not, they weren't too far off a year ago. Can they break through now? We'll see. But I do think this spring period, it cannot be overlooked as to how important it could be for BYU come this fall if they are going to really emerge from the pack in the Big 12 and maybe be that team that shows that, hey, we're the class of the Big 12 and we're going to live our dreams that we had going back over a year now and finally realize them in 2025. All right, coming up in just a minute, let's flip back over to BYU basketball. There's a very interesting quote on Saturday night from Dallin Hall about one of his favorite teammates. And you can tell it was a comment that was full of admiration, respect for this guy. Have we overlooked the legacy of what Fousseyni Traore will be leaving for BYU basketball? We'll delve into that next as we wrap up this edition of Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys to have fun when it comes to NBA, really any other sport out there. But the best part is when the game tips off, action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than with our friends at FanDuel. They are America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're going to look for a bigger payout, even combine your bets into a same-game parlay to hopefully reward your pocketbook a little bit have a little more money in your back pocket. Obviously, all of us want to see our teams win. This could help you obviously have some extra fun along with it. You never feel like you've missed your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use. And when you win, you get paid out instantly from our friends at FanDuel. No waiting around for that money. So right now, new customers can win $150 if your first $5 bet wins. Think about that. $5 bet, it hits $150 richer added to your account. So just visit the FanDuel.com page to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more and do it with our friends at FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. I want to remind you guys, if you've not done so already, please join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Get the inside scoop on all things BYU sports that I am hearing. And the best part is you can ask questions, have one-on-one conversations with myself via text. It's a great way to interact with the show, support the show, and obviously be an insider when it comes to the BYU Cougars. So join us today. You get a 14-day free trial before you're paying anything, and it's just $5 a month beyond that to be a part of the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. So I hope that many of you will consider joining today. All right, coming up, let's talk about BYU basketball. Now, the biggest thing with Fousseyni Traore is he is a guy that has overcome his lack of height during his time at BYU and in college basketball. He is listed at 6'6", 6'7", depending on which roster you looked at during his time at BYU. And he is undersized for the position he plays, but being barrel-chested and having just absolute go-go gadget arms, he has overcome all of that and has been an effective role player for BYU, if not an outright star at times, as a member of the BYU basketball program. Dallin Hall was effusive in his praise about his teammate, and Dallin's been as close to Foose as really anybody at BYU because they've had a pretty nice connection between the two of them during their time as Cougars. But he called him, quote, the most underappreciated BYU basketball player of all time, unquote. Is Dallin Hall right in that assessment about Big Foose? Thinking about it, I'm like, okay, there's a lot of guys who have had some pretty solid careers at BYU that have been underappreciated. I think there are players that, for whatever reason, they aren't as flashy of a player as you would have liked him to have been. They don't have the pizzazz or the media savvy to make them a darling when it comes to the media. But I'm having a hard time arguing against what Dallin Hall is saying here. Because Foose, all he has been is a stalwart for BYU. His performance this past week against West Virginia, for whatever reason, the Mountaineers are tailor-made for Fousseyni Traore to cook them. He had a 20-10 performance in his penultimate home game as a BYU Cougar. He is going to be one of the seniors honored on Saturday night against the University of Utah, and it's going to be the end of a pretty incredible career for a guy that, once again, I think Dallin's right. He's been underappreciated and overlooked at times as a BYU Cougar, but there's been other times that Foose has been absolutely awesome. Remember, he had a bit of a lull earlier this season where he was having a hard time getting the ball in the basket. Just he was trying to get the ball in the hoop and was bouncing off the rim. All he has done, and that kind of is what it was, based on what I was talking with people about Foose, is all he did is he went back to work, focusing on the fundamentals, his footwork, his touch around the rim, understanding it's all about timing and angles, and understanding what it takes for him to succeed in a game where he is undersized for the position he plays. And there's always going to be guys who are inches, if not long. It's just he has guys who could overwhelm him at times, and he has to overcome all that. And all he has done is work and work and work and produce at an absolutely high level during his time at BYU. So, yeah, I think Dallin Hall's got a point that Foose may be the most underappreciated BYU player of his time, if not ever. And I think we're going to miss what Foose brings to BYU when he's done playing for the Cougars. Yeah, Keba Keita, he has those memorable blocks. He'll go up and just absolutely swat the ball out of the air. He had one against West Virginia in the first 3 minutes of the game, and it was an absolute volleyball spike into the court. Could have deflated that basketball, it felt like, the way he got it. But his back to the basket game, it is nowhere near the level of Fousseyni Traore. The other thing was that Dallin Hall said that the coaching staff in the locker room at halftime when BYU was struggling against West Virginia said, okay, two things, guys, go to the rim, and if it doesn't work, get the ball to Foose and get out of his way. All he did was respond with a 20-10 performance and put BYU on his back and led them to a big win over the West Virginia Mountaineers. Foose is an absolute treasure. He has always been a fun dude to talk to. Comes from Mali, didn't have the background in English that many of you might have expected, but he has been really, really open to talking to anybody in the media based on what I understand. I've never had a bad interaction with the kid. He's humble. He deflects all attention to other players. I asked him Saturday night about his feelings about his 20-10 performance, and all he did is say, hey, Dallin and Yegor, who were sitting next to him at the post-game interview, thanks to those guys for setting me up. That's the way he's been his entire career. And once again, when Foose has done it in Provo, I think we're all going to miss a guy who put on for BYU. There were many times he could have easily left last year. When they brought in Keba Keita, he had to know that BYU is bringing in a guy who was going to take his starting job away from him. He easily could have said, you know what, that's it. I'm out. I'm transferring. I'm going to go find a program where I can play, I can start, and I can contribute at a high level. Nope, he didn't do that. He stayed loyal to BYU. And once again, the people I know that know Foose said all he did is work harder and get after it even better and more than he already was. And he was already working at a really, really prodigious rate to become the best basketball player he could become. Foose will likely end up playing overseas. He may get a shout when it comes to the NBA G League, but I love the fact that this is a kid who's become an ultra reliable player for BYU. Is there a guy outside of maybe a Richie Saunders right now, if BYU has the game on the line, you want at the free throw stripe than Fousseyni Traore? I didn't think so. He has been absolute nails in a lot of areas for BYU. Collecting rebounds, setting picks, being the pick and roll big when Keba's not on the floor. I love what Fousseyni Traore has been for BYU, and I think Dallin Hall may have been right on the nose when he said that he has been underappreciated. I have to go back and look at more guys. I can think of guys that I think were underappreciated as BYU Cougars, but that's a personal opinion on the matter. And this may be a personal opinion from Dallin Hall, but those guys are in the trenches together. And Dallin, he knows good basketball players, and that's what Fousseyni Traore has been for years for the BYU Cougars. And I think we've all been lucky to watch his career play out the way it did. Not too often the guys these days stay loyal to a program for 4 and 5 years straight, but Foose, he's got himself in the record books across BYU basketball, rebounding, scoring. He's got all kinds of records that he doesn't have the records per se, but he's on the record sheets, and he's top 10 in a number of categories, if not top 5. And that's a credit to him and his just sticking with what BYU wanted him to become and ultimately living his dream as a BYU Cougar. So as we go into senior week, and obviously senior night will be Saturday night, I think we can all tip our cap to what Fousseyni Traore has been at BYU and thank him for everything he brought to the Cougars. And I don't think BYU's doing what they're doing right now due in part to what Foose has brought to the table. He has been an invaluable piece of what has become an 11-man rotation for BYU, but really the front court, it's Foose and Keba. And when Keva's not on the court, you have to have a reliable big man to come in and continue running what BYU's running. That's all Foose has been. So, yeah, I think Dallin had a point when he made that point about Foose, and a big thank you to Fousseyni Traore as he stares down the final regular season week of his his college basketball career. And here's to watching him continue to do what he's doing, wherever it might be, Europe, Asia, wherever he can play basketball. Foose, I think he'll continue to be a productive basketball player because all he does is work. And that's a pretty strong legacy to have in your back pocket going out of a program that I think understands what hard work is all about. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Cougars. As always, thank you for all of your support. I mentioned it on social media that I had plans to do a postcast after the game on Saturday night. I probably should have mentioned this at the outset of today's show. Sat down to collect my thoughts Saturday night and very quickly fell asleep. Well, apparently I was more exhausted than I thought. So apologies for no postcast, but we'll have one of those tomorrow. We'll also preview Iowa State more in full tomorrow as we get you ready for that game out there in Ames. So big week ahead for BYU basketball. Can they get to the 4th seed and a double bye in the Big 12 tournament? Well, it's all on the table tomorrow as BYU heads to Iowa State. We'll break that down more tomorrow right here on Locked On Cougars.